The fog never lifted from Graymire, not fully, even on the brightest summer morning. Even when the sky strained blue behind the twisted weather vanes and rust-bitten steeples, the mist still clung to the town like a memory that wouldn't let go. It wound through the alleys and coiled between the narrow chimneys, seeping through keyholes and attic vents, carrying the scent of old brass and burnt cedar. At the very edge of Graymire's crumbling district, where cobblestone gave way to slick moss and where oil lamps flickered longer than they should, stood a clock shop that no one remembered opening. It wasn't boarded up. It wasn't abandoned. Exactly. The windows were clean. The brass sign above the entrance had been freshly polished. The words carved into it read, "Morin Riley, horologist. Time is what you make of it." But no one in town had ever seen Morin Riley. Not recently. Not in years. And the clocks inside, every size, shape, and strange configuration, kept perfect time. Every single one. Even the ones with too many hands. Even the ones with none at all. They ticked in harmony, but not quite together, as if the store kept time on its own terms, drifting half a beat off from the world outside. The boy who first noticed the difference was named Ellis, 12, reedy, with hands too large for his coat and a scar on his chin from falling off the seawall last winter. He passed the shop every day on the way to his uncle's bakery, and every day he looked through the front window, and every day he saw the same thing. A man, not moving, not blinking, standing behind the counter, eyes slightly open, face waxy and unshaven, with a coat far too long and buttoned high to the chin. His hands, gloved, rested on either side of a tall brass clock with a thin chain spilling from its base like spilled hair. The first time Ellis saw him, he waved. The second time, he knocked. The third, he pressed his nose to the glass and shouted, "Hey, sir, you all right?" The man never moved. Not once. But the next morning, Ellis found something strange on the sidewalk outside the bakery. A gear. Small. Brass. Still warm to the touch. And etched into its rim, barely visible unless the light hit it just so, were the words, "You're late." Ellis told his uncle, but he just grunted, told him to stop making up stories, and to stop loitering in front of closed-up shops like a gutter rat. So Ellis didn't say anything more, but he pocketed the gear. And that night, just past midnight, when the town slept and the fog crept in like soft teeth, he heard something, ticking, louder than before. Not outside, not from the hall. From under his bed. Ellis didn't scream. He wanted to. He opened his mouth and let out a breath that felt like the beginning of a scream, but it never came. He stared at the floor beside his bed, the cracked tile where he kept his socks bunched like pebbles, and where an old coil spring mousetrap had sat untouched since February. The ticking continued, precise, measured, like it belonged inside a grandfather clock, or a heart that no longer beat on its own. He leaned over, hand trembling, and peered underneath. At first, he saw only the usual, dust bunnies, crumbs from late-night biscuits, a stub of crayon long since snapped in half. Then he saw it. A gear, not the one he'd found that morning. That one was still in his coat pocket, beneath the windowsill where he kept his dead insect collection, in a rusted tin. This was a different gear, larger, tarnished around the edges, and ticking, not just clicking, but producing a low rhythmic sound as if something unseen turned it gently from beneath the floor. Ellis froze, not because it was impossible, but because it wasn't, because something in him knew this was going to happen, like he'd been waiting for it, like the man in the clock shop had given him this moment, this humming invitation wrapped in brass teeth and spinning teeth. Slowly, Ellis reached down. His fingers brushed the gear. It stopped ticking. But behind it, something moved. Not scurrying like a rat. Not slithering like water. It shifted. Softly. Deliberately. Like breath being pulled backward through lungs that had forgotten how to breathe. Ellis snatched his hand back. Heart pounding now. But when he blinked, the gear was gone. He scrambled to his feet and ran to window. But the alley was still. Nothing outside. No sign of footsteps. Just fog, riding faintly between the street lamps and the faint chime of the bell tower at Graymire's southern gate, striking the hour. Only, it was early. Ellis checked the clock on his desk. 12:17. The tower was striking 1. He turned to his bedside drawer and yanked it open, pulling out the brass gear he'd found that morning. It was warm again, and the etched words, "You're late," were no longer alone. Beneath them, in the thinnest possible script, another line had appeared. Second gear set, awaiting third. The bakery oven woke early. Ellis's uncle, a man whose words were fewer than his loaves, was already elbows deep in flour by the time Ellis arrived, boots damp from dew and fog, coat heavy despite no rain. "Late," Uncle murmured without looking up. "I know," Ellis said, distracted. He hadn't slept. Not really. Between the ticking under his bed and the faint impression that something in his room had been watching him blink, the night had crawled forward in one long, breathless stretch. Ellis kept his hands in his pockets, fingers wrapped tightly around the warm gear. He didn't tell Uncle. He didn't know why. Some part of him whispered, "Don't." It wasn't fear. Not exactly. It was possession. Like the gear belonged to him. Like this thing that had started, whatever it was, had chosen him. The bakery smelled of yeast and burnt wood and apple cores. The glass windows fogged with steam. Graymeyer's morning fog tapped quietly at the panes, eager to come inside. Ellis was midway through shaping dough when he heard it again. Tick, tick, tick. Only this time it was in rhythm with something else. Not his heart, not the clock on the wall. Something deeper. He turned his head slowly toward the back room. No one was allowed in the back room. It was where his uncle kept the century-old oven gears and the bellows, and that strange old ledger with the names of bakers long since buried. But the ticking was louder there, almost like someone was winding something backwards. Later that afternoon, Ellis stepped out on his break, swearing he'd walk straight past Clockmaker's shop, that he wouldn't glance, wouldn't peek, wouldn't even breathe in that direction. He made it 6 steps past the alley entrance. Then he stopped, the brass gear in his coat pocket twisted in his palm. He hadn't moved it. The metal turned with a sensation of something inside trying to climb out. Ellis turned. The shop's window was no longer fogged. The man, if man he was, stood behind the counter again. But this time his head was tilted, just slightly, and his gloved hand pointed downward. Ellis didn't understand. Not until he glanced at the door. At the base of the frame, where the hinges met warped wood, was a thin crack, like someone had pried open and then sealed again from the inside. In that crack, nestled delicately like an offering left by some tiny, ancient hand, was a new gear. This one was dark, nearly black, and carved on the surface in curling script were 3 words. "Win me next." Ellis waited until sundown. He knew better than to be seen returning to that alley twice in one day. Graymeyer was a town that gossiped through shutters and judged through half-open curtains. He could already hear Mrs. Peabody from the corner grocer whispering over her tomatoes that Ellis Bear had gone strange, same as his father had before he vanished into the black bog. So he waited, and when the bells at St. Myers tolled 6 times, he slipped out of the bakery with his apron still damp and walked down the alley without hesitating, straight through the door. No hesitation, no knock. The shop swallowed him whole. It was warm again, not comforting, not hearth warm. It was mechanical, a warmth that felt like steam trapped in a copper lung. The counter was empty. The clockmaker was gone. But the gear was there, waiting, black and heavy, sitting like an eye on the velvet runner. Ellis reached out. As soon as his fingers touched the metal, he felt it, the latch. Not a literal one, not mechanical. This was internal. Somewhere deep in his chest, something shifted, something clicked, like a drawer that had always been part of him but never opened. The gear was cold now. Its inscription, once vivid, began to fade as if the metal were drinking its own meaning. "Win me next." Ellis pocketed it and turned to leave, but the door was no longer there. Only wall, wood paneled, wallpapered, aged. No knob, no frame, no sign a door had ever existed. The tick-tick-tick began again. This time not under his bed, not in the bakery, but inside him, behind his right ear. A soft flutter of teeth turning teeth, like a moth inside a locket. Ellis didn't panic. Strangely, it felt inevitable. He wandered past the counter, deeper into the shop where clocks hung from every beam. Grandfathers, mantles, cuckoos, sundials affixed with tiny moving brass limbs. Each one whispered in its own voice, never louder than a breath, all ticking out of sync, like a choir singing 15 different songs in 15 different languages at once. At the far wall was a mirror. Ellis stepped toward it. In his reflection, he looked the same. Same tousled dark hair, same crooked collar, same tired eyes. But something moved in the glass behind him. A figure. He turned. Nothing. Back to the mirror. The figure was closer now. Thin, slender, face wrapped in a cloth of gears, as if someone had woven metal into a veil. Its hand extended. In the palm, a fourth gear. Blood red. Tiny. Teeth jagged. Etched in deep, uneven gouges were 4 trembling words. Do not wind yet. The figure did not move. Neither did Ellis. Not even when his own reflection began to smile, and his face did not. Ellis awoke in his own bed, fully dressed, boots caked in alley mud, coat heavy with the scent of oil and time. The clockmaker's shop was gone, if it had ever been there at all. Outside his window, Graymeyer's fog rolled thick and fast, faster than usual, crawling over rooftops like a thing with purpose. He sat up slowly. His coat rustled. Inside the pocket, all 3 gears were warm now. The first, brass and clean. The second, black and ancient. And the third, red and jagged, humming slightly against his thigh as though impatient to be used. He did not dare wind any of them. The ticking had moved again, no longer behind his ear, but somewhere lower in his ribs. Tick, tock, tick. It sounded muffled, as if someone were knocking faintly on a door from inside his lungs. He stood, walked to the mirror. His reflection was normal, but only for a second. Then it tilted its head, just slightly, a familiar movement, the clockmaker's gesture. Ellis blinked. His reflection did not. A knock sounded at his bedroom door. 3 soft raps. No one was there. On the floor, pressed neatly against the threshold like a letter from a quiet enemy, was a sheet of paper. The ink looked like it had been poured, not written. The wind is not yours to give. Let it take you instead. He burned in the fireplace, but the smoke curled unnaturally, forming shapes as it rose. Not letters, but sigils, symbols that felt old and way beyond age. That day, Ellis tried to go about his routine. He served loaves at the bakery, sorted receipts, took deliveries from the boys at the mill, but every sound had rhythm. The broom on the floor, the door creaking open, even the rain on the glass. Everything beat to an invisible timepiece he couldn't unhear. Worse still, the people of Graymeyer looked off, slightly too still when they spoke, their eyes flickering sideways like cogs searching for alignment. More than once, he saw a mouth move before the words came. He watched Mr. Dunlap wave hello on Main Street, but for just a moment, less than a blink, Ellis could have sworn his wrist bent backwards as if on a hinge, and then righted itself like nothing had happened. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The world was winding down or winding in. He couldn't tell. That night, Ellis did not sleep. He simply waited. At midnight, the red gear rolled out his coat on its own, stopped at the foot of the bed. It clicked once, and the floorboard beneath it began to curl upward, like petals blooming, revealing a black void and a narrow brass stairwell that spiraled down into the dark. The gear rolled to the edge and paused, then fell. He followed. The stairwell was too narrow for comfort, barely wide enough for Ellis's shoulders. The brass beneath his boots echoed with each step, not like footsteps, but like a chisel tapping softly against a skull. No walls, just dark, and the sound of the gear tumbling somewhere below, like a tiny wool clattering across old tile. He didn't call out. Somehow, speaking felt forbidden, like the stairwell was listening. He descended for what felt like hours. The air grew thicker, warmer. Each breath carried a taste of iron, like blood scraped from a watchmaker's knuckle. The ticking was back, not in his head, not in his bones. Everywhere, a pulse in the very air. And then, without warning, He stepped off the final stair and into a room. It was vast, not wide, tall, like the inside of a chimney stretching up into forever. On every wall, embedded in the stone, were clocks, thousands of them, no two alike, all ticking, all crooked, some made of glass, others of wood, bone, metal, even teeth. Each clock had a name carved beneath it, names he recognized. Mirror Blanche, Reverend Godfrey Klein, Calder Phipps, Ellis Barrett. His name was beneath a small silver pocket watch. It didn't tick. Not yet, but there was a keyhole in the center. Waiting. Across the chamber stood a figure. Not the veiled one from the mirror. This one was cloaked in ash, its face masked by a dozen spinning dials, each one counting down, each hand twitching like a dying spider. It raised a long, delicate hand. A key glimmered between its fingers, not offered, just shown. Ellis didn't move. The figure pointed to the watch with his name. Then it turned, melting into the wall, like smoke finding cracks in old stone. The chamber dimmed. The clocks grew louder. And from high above, where the shadows curled in impossible shapes, a slow groaning began. Metal dragging across metal, like a coffin being pulled through a vent. Ellis turned to leave, but the stairwell was gone. Only wall now, polished brass with no seam. Trapped, he walked the circumference of the room, brushing fingers along the names. Each one felt warm to the touch, like breath had been exhaled across the metal only moments before. At the far end, he found another gear. This one was green with corrosion. Its teeth bent like fingers clenched in pain. No inscription, just a single symbol scorched into the center. A spiral, eaten at the edges. He picked it up, and the chamber shifted. Clocks tilted. Hands reversed. Somewhere, a bell rang, and from a hidden crevice, a mouth whispered in a language he couldn't remember forgetting. One wound, one turn, one loss. One wound, one turn, one loss. Over and over. Ellis clutched the gear and pressed it to his chest. A faint click, and all the clocks in the room stilled. For one breath, then the one with his name ticked once. The tick of his watch echoed like thunder in that strange vertical tune. Just once, but it was enough. Ellis stumbled back as the clock with his name breathed out, a soft gust, warm as exhalation, brushing against his face with a scent of wilted jasmine and mildew. The hands had moved. From 12 to 11, no one else's clock had changed, only his. And now the chamber began to shift. The walls unfolded, not slid or opened, but folded outward like pages from a leather-bound book left to rot in a cellar. Each panel peeled away to reveal rooms, small glass cells suspended in the dark, each containing a scene. And Ellis knew them. There was his father's bakery, full of flower ghosts, his childhood bedroom, where moths spun in the rafters, the alley behind the mill, where he first kissed Mirror Blanche, and a room he didn't recognize. Bare stone, a desk, a mirror too large for the wall, no door. Inside sat himself, younger, with eyes too wide and hands bandaged, staring not at the mirror, but through it. Ellis stepped toward the cell, drawn. As he did, the gear in his hand began to heat, its teeth glowing faintly, buzzing like an insect's wings. He held it out, and the cell peeled open, the glass shimmering like disturbed water. He stepped inside. The air changed, colder, heavy with unsaid things. His younger self didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Ellis reached for the bandages, uncertain if he meant to help or to remember. The cloth unraveled with a hiss. No blood, just gears, tiny, infantile cogs and rods poking through the flesh where bone should be. They twitched when the light touched them. His younger self finally turned its head, mouth open, no tongue, just a winding key, slowly turning with each silent scream. Ellis backed away, but the cell rippled, the glass sealing him in, trapping him in the moment. From outside, the chamber's clocks resumed their rhythm. Tick, tock, tick. Ellis turned. The mirror in the cell was no longer a mirror. It was a window now. Through it, he saw the real room again. The chamber, the clocks, the vertical void, and someone watching him. Not the ash mask figure. Someone else. A child. Pale. Hair like corn silk soaked in soot. Sitting atop the gear-strewn floor, legs folded, face blank. In her lap sat a watchmaker's case, open to reveal a dozen tools, and a single eye floating in brine, lidless and staring. She pointed a key in Ellis's double's mouth, then to him, and mouthed a word, wound. Ellis reached out and grasped the key. It felt alive, beating. He turned it once. The double jerked, back arched, mouth open too wide, and vanished into gear dust. The mirror shattered, and Ellis was falling weightless. Falling wasn't like in dreams. There was no screaming, no desperate clutching at the air, just a sense of unfolding, like he was being pulled inside out slowly, methodically, like a piece of ribbon through a needle's eye. And then, stillness. Not ground, not impact, just suspended. Ellis hovered in a place that wasn't light or dark. It was a moment between blinks, when the world flickers but hasn't yet returned. There were shapes, hints of clocks, but they had faces. Some wore his. Others bore features he recognized. Distant relatives, lost friends, even those he only knew from obituaries. Their mouths moved in silence. Their eyes ticked, ticked. He tried to speak, but his own mouth felt full of sand. Then, gently, gravity returned, not downward, but sideways. He landed in a hallway, not the clockmakers. No brass, no mirrors, just ancient wood, warped with time and moisture. The ceiling sagged under the weight of cobwebs that pulsed softly, as if breathing. He knew this hallway. This was the sanatorium, the one outside of Greenridge Hollow, where they took his mother after her third winter of speaking in palindromes and stitching numbers into her own hair. He had never visited her. And yet here it was, whole and untouched, though the real one had burned down before he turned 20. Ellis moved forward. The lights above flickered in time with a new sound. Not ticking, scraping, a chair leg, a metal bed frame, something dragging its way from the far end of the corridor. With every step forward, doors along the hallway began to unlock. Not all the way, just the soft clack of the latch sliding back. From within each room, something breathed. Slow, wheezing, deliberate. He stopped before a door marked 207, the one she had been in. The plaque was scratched, but underneath, in scorched wood, someone had carved. She never closed her eyes. Not once. Ellis pushed the door open. Inside was a woman, her back to him, hair cascading in ropes of ash and thread, reaching the floor and twisting into loops that spelled numbers. Not her hair. Thread, carefully woven, looped, stitched into the scalp. Dozens of tiny clock hands dangled from the strands, clicking gently with each small movement she made. She didn't turn around. She didn't have to. He knew it was her. The room was otherwise bare, just peeling paint and a single item on the floor in front of her, a music box made of bone and teeth, wound tight. The moment he stepped in, it began to play. No tune, just rhythm. 3 clicks, 1 pause, 2 clicks, 1 pause, over and over. From the ceiling, something dropped. A spool, then another, then a gear, then a tiny glass eye, all falling slowly, like snowfall, collecting around his feet in an ever-growing nest of mechanical refuse. He stepped closer, and her voice spoke, quiet, distant, like a note held too long on a cracked phonograph. You left me in a room full of time and expected me to survive it. Ellis swallowed, but the air had thickened into syrup. She turned, not her face, just a mass made of spinning hands, their speeds chaotic. Some seconds, other centuries. Her eyes were his. Ellis reached toward the music box, but it stopped, and every clock in her hair screamed. The scream was not a sound. It was a pressure, like standing too close to a great bell just after it struck, vibrating through Ellis's bones, turning marrow to glass. He dropped to his knees as the room convulsed, the walls bending inward, not from collapse, but from something waking up inside them. The clock hands on her mask spun faster, so fast they became a blur. She didn't move again. Didn't need to. The floor moved instead. It softened. Grain by grain, it peeled apart. Would it pulp? pulp to thread, thread to mist, until Ellis slipped through, swallowed by something that felt like a heartbeat disguised as gravity. He fell downward, but it wasn't falling anymore. It was crawling. The space he emerged into was too low to stand, too long to crawl quickly. A crawl space, suffocating and silent. The walls were made of lined paper, yellowed and damp, covered in frantic handwriting. He crawled forward, knees crunching on what felt like crushed beetle shells and snapped pens. The words on the paper walls blurred as he passed them, but one line repeated again and again, smeared in ink and something darker. You must pass to the hour before birth. He kept crawling. The light behind him vanished. In front, a faint glow began to pulse, weak like candlelight behind skin. The further he went, the more the space narrowed, until the walls brushed his shoulders, his spine, his throat. The paper began to flake, shedding phrases in his ears. They whispered through his hair, "Don't turn around." They watch what you forget. The first lie you told still breathes. Ellis closed his eyes and kept crawling. Eventually the space opened slightly, enough for him to kneel. In the center of the floor was a cradle. It was made of polished obsidian and brass bones, gently rocking without touch. Inside lay no child, only a tangle of broken watch parts. Gears still ticking faintly, springs humming with a breathless rhythm. Nestled in the center, atop a bed of hair and ash, was a tooth. He remembered losing it, not as a child, as a grown man, during an accident at the factory. It had never been found. He reached into the cradle, and the crawl space shrank. The paper walls curled inward like a flame licking paper edges. Ellis turned back to escape, but behind him, something else was crawling. A figure. Its face was a smear of second hands. Its limbs were made of tied pocket watch chains and old crib mobiles twisted and creaking. Its mouth was a music box. It crawled faster, and faster, and faster. Ellis scrambled away, but the cradle shook violently as the tooth inside cracked open like an egg, revealing a single eye, milky, lidless, mechanical. It blinked, once, and the crawl space fell away again, this time upward, as if it had been exhaled by time itself. Ellis awoke on a velvet divan, his back sticky with sweat and something else, oil maybe or blood slicked in with machine grease. The air was close. It smelled like old perfume trapped in iron. Brass-framed portraits lined the walls of the parlor, each one shifting subtly when not directly observed. He sat up. Across from him was a grandfather clock, its case cracked and gently bleeding a stream of black sand from beneath the dial. Its hands moved backward, not smoothly, but in short, skipping jerks, like the whole clock was stuttering. With each jerk, the room dimmed and brightened, and the chandelier above gave a faint metallic scream. To the left, a tea table had been set. Cups, saucers, and a dozen empty chairs, each occupied by a figure with cloth draped over its head. The cloth was stiff, patterned like worn doilies, and they twitched when Ellis looked at them directly. He stood, though his legs felt disobedient. One of his shoes was missing. The floor beneath the carpet creaked with purpose, almost conversationally. He moved to the nearest covered figure and lifted the cloth. His own face, but older, mouth agape, teeth gone. The eyes blinked once, then whispered in a soft, sucking voice, "There are more of you than you remember." He dropped the cloth. A second later, the tea kettle screamed. Not hissed, screamed. A human shriek, long and wet and unmistakably female. One of the cups shattered from the sound alone. Ellis turned toward the window, expecting to see the world beyond warped or lost. But there was no outside, only a wall of ticking pendulums, swaying in unison, suspended in a blank white void like ceremonial blades waiting for a rhythm that hadn't yet arrived. At the far side of the room, a door waited, slightly ajar, dark behind the frame. It hadn't been there before. He approached, but the closer he got, the more his ears filled with chiming. Not bells, not clocks, chimes made of teeth, striking bone against bone, playing lullabies he hadn't heard since the womb. He opened the door. The next room was larger than the house could allow. A library, but not of books. The shelves were filled with hourglasses, each label with names carved into it that looked soaked in something thick and dark. Some were empty, some nearly full, some ran upward, and one, just one, was labeled Ellis Finch. It lay sideways, its sand held still in a tense pause, like it was waiting for him to make a decision. He reached toward it, but as his hand neared, the glass grew cold, freezing then steaming. Frost bloomed outward from the hourglass, running along the shelf and down the wooden spine of the structure like veins and brittle skin. Then, from the corridor behind him, came footsteps, metallic, deliberate, clockmaker's boots. Ellis turned, heart jarred with the force of panic. But the door was gone. The library was changing. As Ellis stepped back from the shelf labeled with his name, the rows of hourglasses began to rotate, not physically, but conceptually. The aisles stretched and turned, not in space but in meaning, rearranging themselves like stanzas in a terrible hymn. He ran, but there was no clear direction. Each corridor he passed grew narrower, the hourglasses taller, until they brushed the ceiling like cathedral pillars. A soft humming started behind the walls, a wordless lullaby made from dozens of mouths without lips, whispering through glass. Eventually, the hourglasses gave way to mannequins, wooden, jointed, bent in impossible ways. Some were posed in agony, some in reverence. All had broken clock faces instead of heads. Their hands fused their chests where hearts might be, and they moved slowly in increments, as if caught between moments. Ellis ducked between them, each footstep echoing far too loud. As he passed a particularly large figure, it turned its shattered face toward him, gears clacking inside its neck like dry insects. Its mouth opened. From inside spilled ticks, audible ticks, tiny and hungry. He ran again, heart battering his ribs like a trapped bird. Finally, the corridor led to a chamber, circular, domed, and echoing with the creak of ancient machinery. At its center was a choir, not of singers, but of machines. Dozens of clockwork figures stood in concentric rings, each with brass lungs and phonograph horns for throats. Their chests expanded and contracted with terrifying precision, producing a song made from rusted breaths, lost lullabies, and weeping pendulums. Their conductor was faceless, a tall figure of porcelain and ash, draped in ceremonial robes made from disassembled watch bands and piano wire. Around its neck hung a pendant, a miniature cradle-shaped locket which ticked with its own heartbeat. It turned toward Ellis and pointed. The choir stopped. The sudden silence was unbearable, like stepping outside sound entirely. Ellis stumbled forward, driven by a compulsion not his own. The conductor stepped aside to reveal a vacancy in the first ring, an open spot, waiting. Ellis understood. He was expected to join. There was a shape on the ground at his feet, a bracelet of coiled metal and stitched skin, designed to wrap around the throat. He reached for it, trembling, as the conductor nodded, slowly, mechanically, like an automaton agreeing with fate. But just before he slipped it on, something moved in the rafters above. A fluttering. A scrap of paper drifted down, landing softly on the floor beside him. It bore a single phrase, written in frantic charcoal. "You do not sing in graves." Ellis looked up, and the ceiling blinked. It was an eye, massive and lidless, set into the roof of the chamber like a stained glass god. The moment he looked into it, the chamber folded, not collapsed, folded, like a map bending the wrong way, and he was back in the corridor. But this time it was burning. Ellis stood in a hallway of flame. Not ordinary fire. This burned cold, casting no heat, only a crackling absence that licked at the wallpaper and floorboards like forgotten memories. The fire's glow turned shadows into shapes, reaching arms, kneeling heads, watching silhouettes that never moved, yet somehow breathed in time with the flicker. He tried to run, but the hallway extended with each step, a cruel trick of geometry. No matter how far he moved, the end remained just beyond reach, like a string being unwound behind his spine. The wallpaper peeled in long curls, revealing layers beneath. First a floral pattern, then clocks, then crude, childlike drawings, scrawled timepieces, broken faces, black stick figures, missing hands. Then something else, flesh, pale and veined, beating faintly behind the walls. He stopped, A door appeared to his left, heavy, with blackened by soot. The doorknob was an eyeball, blinking, bloodshot, and twitching. It turned of its own accord. The door opened into a dining room, laid out for a feast. Dozens of chairs, all overturned. The table sagged under the weight of dishes untouched for centuries. The food was still warm. Something breathed at the head of the table. A man, or the remnants of one, sat slumped in an ornate, high-backed chair. His skin was parchment. His hands were made from shattered alarm clocks, ticking independently. On the plate before him sat a coiled bundle of hair and watch gears, stitched together into a shape resembling a heart. He lifted his face. It was Ellis, but hollowed, eyes black, mouth stitched. When he opened it, the threads tore and poured out sand. The voice that came was not his. You fed the clocks. Now they want more. Ellis backed away, bumping into a grandfather clock that hadn't been there before. It ticked once, and he was suddenly in his childhood bedroom. But something was wrong. The floor was 3 inches too high. The ceiling was made from teeth, and outside the window there was no sky. Only an endless field of clocks, all running backward, faster and faster, spitting out moments like confetti. On the bed was a box, wrapped in fabric pattern like the wallpaper in the manor. A tag hung from it. To Ellis Finch. For your forgetting. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a pocket watch, still warm, but when he looked closely, the glass was filled not with gears, but with a small human eye darting about, terrified. Behind him, the bedroom door opened again. The conductor stood there, silent, waiting. Behind it stood dozens of figures. The choir, the mannequins, the shadow under the carpet, the tea guests, the hourglasses now shattered into wind. All waiting, all pointing to him. Ellis dropped the watch, and the eye inside it screamed. Ellis tried to run, but the floor beneath him softened into pages. A hallway built from stacked books that rustled as he moved. Every step caused whispers to spill from the spines, like breath held too long. Names, numbers, events he didn't recognize, but somehow knew had once belonged to him. The air was thick with the smell of iron ink and mildew-slick parchment. The walls pulsed with veins of brass tubing, carrying flickering scraps of memory like blood cells inside a corpse. The books began to fall from the shelves, one by one at first, then all at once, as if rejecting their own contents. Ellis ducked, shielding his head as tomes burst open midair, vomiting out images, not pictures, but frozen instants. A staircase soaked in blood, a mother holding her infant's mouth closed in a cradle made of bones, a match lighting inside a throat, a child with Ellis's face watching himself sleep. He stumbled through it all and reached the final chamber, the memory engine, a massive contraption, suspended in an atrium of collapsing stars. It rotated with agonizing slowness, rings upon rings of gears and typewriter hammers, all riding at once onto a single scroll of skin, pulled taut between two pulleys. The text etched into it pulses of alive, each letter squirming before settling into place. A name burned its way across. Ellis Finch. Born, unwritten. Died, pending. A hatch opened at the base of the machine, and something crawled out. It was Ellis again, but younger, perhaps 8 years old, dressed in the uniform of a choir boy. His eyes were gone, sockets filled with spinning clock hands. He spoke with two voices overlapping, one cold and female. You gave us your hours. You just didn't remember. But the minutes are what they come back for. The boy held up a silver needle. You don't belong outside the mechanism. You were born inside it. The child stepped closer. Ellis backed into a gear wall. The brass hissed against his spine, searing symbols into the fabric of his coat. The scroll stretched above him suddenly ripped, revealing a hole not into light, but into a room he recognized, his father's study, from before the fire. Ellis saw himself, just a boy, standing by the old desk, holding something, a broken watch. He had whispered something back then, and now the echo of that whisper returned to him. If you open a clock backward, you can hide inside. It wasn't memory. It was a spell. Ellis ran to the tear and dived through. He was pulled inside the memory like water, cold and stinging, and then silence. Ellis landed on soft carpet, the kind that soaks up sound, the kind that remembers footsteps. He didn't stand. He lay still, breathing, listening. There was no ticking, no gears, no pendulums, just the sound of old wood in his own breath, ragged and shallow. He rose slowly. The room was not the study. Not quite. It had the same desk, same window, same oil painting of the lake he'd once fallen into as a child. But the proportions were wrong. The walls seemed to lean inward, like they were trying to overhear him. The fireplace had no chimney above it, just sky, gray and roiling. He crossed the room. The window looked out onto an impossible scene. The entire clockmaker's graveyard lay stretched across a snowfield, half buried. Timepieces of all sizes lay broken in the frost. Watches with faces weeping black oil, pocket watches twisted into Mobius strips, sundials growing like mushrooms from the ground. The manor was gone, just a smudge on the horizon, like the outline of something that had been forgotten. Ellis touched the glass. It was warm. Behind him, the desk creaked. He turned. The chair was pulled out, and a figure now sat at the desk. It was a conductor, but older, withered, pale as paper left in the sun. Her hands rested motionless on the desk, palms up as if offering nothing. Her face was hidden behind a veil made from clock chains, each link inscribed with a date. He felt a sudden awareness. He was supposed to sit. Ellis stepped forward, sat across from her. The conductor placed a sheet of vellum between them. A contract. No ink, just two indentations, a fingerprint, and a signature already written. His. The conductor slid over a pen. Its nib was a shard of mirror. It hummed softly. "Do you accept the ending you remember?" she said in a voice like pages torn slowly. "Or the beginning you have forgotten?" Ellis reached for the pen. His hand trembled. He glanced back toward the window, the snowfield, the graveyard. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tower shuddered upright, its chimes moving backward. He looked down at the signature. It was written in his childhood script. Crude, innocent, final. Then came a sound, a ticking, faint and slow, from inside his chest. And he knew there was no contract. There was only one thing left to do. He closed his eyes and said aloud, "I was never outside. I am the hour forgotten." The veil lifted, and beneath it was no face, only a dial, and the second hand began to move. The moment the second hand moved, everything began to unravel, not with violence, not with speed, but with a slow, merciful undoing. The dial beneath the conductor's veil turned once, and as it did, the light in the study dimmed, not into shadow, but into memory. Objects lost their weight. Corners softened. The air began to breathe. Ellis felt it first in his spine, a gentle tug, as though someone were drawing a thread from the base of his skull down through his body. It didn't hurt. It was familiar, like being unstitched from a suit he had worn too long. The contract vanished. The desk became a crib. The carpet became grass. The sound of ticking shifted into something wetter, softer, a heartbeat, and then nothing but the sound of wind through pine trees, the cry of a lark in a forgotten season. He stood in a clearing, a real one now. No gears, no smoke, no mechanisms, just a forest, the kind from childhood, where stories had edges and endings were clean. There was a single grave marker ahead, simple, wood, weathered. He approached it slowly. The name carved on it was Ellis Finch. Beneath it, "Here lies the one who kept time, until time kept him." But there was no fear, no grief, only the deep, humming ache of acceptance. He reached forward and brushed the wood with his fingers, and the grave split, not in the earth, but in the air above it, a seam in reality. Beyond the seam was a room, a nursery, a mobile of brass stars turning above a crib, a melody box playing a soft tune made of sighs and lullabies, and in the crib, an infant, eyes shut tight, clutching a broken watch in his tiny hand. The child opened his eyes and looked at him. Ellis knelt beside the crib and leaned in. "I remember now," he whispered, "but you don't have to." He reached into his chest and removed the final gear, the one that had always ticked no matter where he fled, no matter how far he rewound. It was old, rusted, and it pulsed faintly with light. He placed it in the child's hand, and the mobile stopped turning. All the clocks in the graveyard silenced at once. The hands aligned, and time exhaled. A warm wind swept through the clearing. The grave faded. The conductor's voice returned, softer than before, not behind him but within him. Sleep now, little maker. We'll wake you when the hour forgets. And Ellis Finch finally closed his eyes.